Hello, my friends. Just a short one today. Sorry I haven't made a new video recently. I've been really busy. My son just turned 1 year old, so put a comment, happy birthday in the chat to wish him a happy birthday. And I'm getting ready to go teach a seminar in Amersfoort, Holland on the topic of internal alchemy this weekend. This weekend being November the 15th, 16th, and 17th of 2024. So I've been a little busy and I haven't put out a video recently, but I thought I would do a little one today about a common misconception in the Qigong and martial arts community. That is that there is such a thing as a bivalent relationship between Taoist and Buddhist breathing. Okay, so let's lay out the basic concept and then we will attempt to make a critique of it to show why it's an incorrect idea. So the basic concept is that in Qigong practice or in martial arts practice, there's two types of breathing techniques. Two main ones that are used. One type is called Shunxi, which means smooth breathing, and the other is called Nixi, reverse breathing. And so those breathing methods are associated with Buddhism and Taoism, respectively. So Buddhists breathe by breathing into their abdomen, and the abdomen extends outward and downward, whereas Taoists breathe in and they withdraw the abdomen and pull it up and in. Okay, so that's the basic premise. Um, Now, let's break down where those breathing practices are used, and then we'll go into more detail about what's incorrect about this concept. So, the idea of Xunxi, or smooth breathing, can just be said to be basically a kind of meditative breathing. Um, you can do it whether you're seated in meditation, you can do it whether you're doing Qigong, you can do it if you're doing martial arts like Tai Chi Chuan, etc. Um, and it's just basically breathing to your lower abdomen. But it's not typically used in arts like internal alchemy or arts where you do very deep meditation because of the inflation of the lower abdomen. And so the lower abdomen breathing in those other styles of practice, um, they're usually not referred to as a specific style of breathing unless it's Tai Chi, embryonic breathing, which is a specific thing that I did a video about. But typically in Taoism, to refer just to sort of normal abdominal breathing, it's just called Hu Xi. Hu Xi means exhalation and inhalation. Okay, so the idea of the abdomen expanding on the inhalation and relaxing on the exhalation is pretty much just consistent with meditative breathing in general. The other method, Nixi, reverse breathing, specifically comes from the martial arts. It's a breathing which allows the abdominal floor to become stronger. And so the basic technique is that on the inhalation, the abdomen withdraws inward and upward. The anus and genitals slightly withdraw inward and upward. Am I going to get in trouble from YouTube for using technical names for? Anyway, I hope not. The two yin, as they call them. Okay, so they withdraw inward and upward slightly on the in breath, and on the out breath, the abdomen relaxes. And so the basic idea is that these are two opposite types of breathing, and they're used for different purposes. And so, according to some Qigong thinkers in Western countries, mostly the United States, to be honest, the basic idea is that when you do natural breathing or Buddhist breathing, it's not meant to be specifically cultivating the movement of energy in the body. It's sort of meant to relax the body. And maybe the best you could hope is that some chi would aggregate in your lower dantian, but it wouldn't move around in the meridians. On the other hand, for reverse breathing, what happens is when you breathe in and you suck in your abdomen and suck up your genitals and anus, that causes the chi to begin to aggregate in the lower back and rise up the spine to the head. Thus starting the microcosmic orbit. But this is not this is not correct. So basically, Nixi, or reverse breathing, came from the martial arts. The reason for practicing reverse breathing is the same reason why you would do it when you do a deadlift at the gym, right? Or when you do a squat at the gym, right? You don't inflate your abdomen outward on the inhalation when you do a deadlift, right? Because your body, when it wants to have strength from the core, it naturally withdraws the abdomen on the in-breath. That's just a very natural breathing process. So in martial arts, people just figured out that this was a good way of practicing, and then they would practice a strategy where they use, like, let's say we take Xingyi Chuan, or arts that are harder in nature, where they have hard punches and kicks. So then they'll do one part of the breathing, which is inward drawing of the breath, which is called na, right, with drawing in, and another part where they do tu, which is spitting out. Okay, so spitting out means that the breath, when the breath is released from the body, the power is released from the body too, right? And so the withdrawing of the breath in terms of reverse breathing is withdrawing the abdomen inward and upward, and the genitals and anus come along for a ride to some extent. And then when you breathe out, then the power goes out, and it's like you spit the technique out, right? So that's the basic idea of reverse breathing. It's a martial arts concept, actually, but it was incorporated into Qigong at some point, and it's kind of hard to say when. So I think that it's safe to say that in the 20th century it was incorporated into modern Qigong mostly, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's some background relationship, perhaps within the context of like Shaolin Qigong, under names like, I Jin Jing or Ba Duan Jin, Shirar Duan Jin, right? These kind of techniques that originate from kung fu practice. We sometimes call them nei gong, right? Internal skill. So I wouldn't be surprised, perhaps, if reverse breathing was used for nei gong techniques, because nei gong techniques, in their sort of old traditional sense, tend to be based on sort of holding like extended stretching postures, and holding various martial arts type postures to open up the body, right? And so in a lot of those instances, doing reverse breathing is appropriate, and that could be perhaps how the method made it into qigong. Or another way you can think about it is every martial art has some neigong and some weigong, internal work and external work. And so it could be the case, for instance, that when you're doing your stretching for martial arts, you use the same breathing practice, approximately, that you would use in the martial arts, and maybe that's how it made it into qigong. Really, really hard to say. But and nobody is arguing with the idea that reverse breathing is a common practice in martial arts, and nobody is arguing that it's a common practice in qigong. So I'll give you an example from my bookshelf. This really cool book that my friend Fabrice Pichet sent to me. It's written by Lin Ho Sheng. So my friend Fabrice, he's a student of qigong master named Lin Ho Sheng, and Lin Ho Sheng created a Taiji qigong system called Taiji Shibasher. And he definitely incorporates reverse breathing into his style. There's no question about it. Okay, many of the traditional qigong methods do this. It's very, very common. But the reason is not necessarily to circulate the small heavenly orbit. That's the first thing. But that's not really what I'm taking umbrage with. Actually, my main point is that it's not Taoist breathing. So now, this takes a little bit of explanation, so the rest of the video is going to be about this topic. Taoism uses the concepts of shun and ni. So shun means to essentially go with the flow or to comply with, and ni means to reverse or to rebel against. Of course, you'll see these in Chinese medicine too. But shun and ni in Taoism are concepts which are not related to the breath, mostly. Okay, so here's where I think the problem comes in. Number one, in the oldest Taoist classic, the Tao Te Ching, it says, if you comply, then you'll live, and if you rebel, then you die. But later Taoists looked at the theory of the Tao Te Ching, and they said, no, you know what, actually, the theory of the Tao Te Ching suggests that if you reverse, then you'll live for longer, and if you go with the flow, then you die. What does that mean? Especially for those of you who really like Alan Watts, maybe you're getting mad at me right now. But what it means is contextually important in the practice of internal alchemy specifically. The way that internal alchemy practitioners view life and death is they say, after your body is generated, when you're first a fetus gestating in the womb, you're essentially just a collection of pure energy which comes from the genetic material of your parents. I'm using the term genetic loosely here. In Taoism, they say heavenly inheritance. And that heavenly inheritance comes all the way back from the Tao, which created the universe. And so it's really, really good positive energy. It builds your body. And after you're born, you still have a lot of that pre-heaven, right, or pre-celestial or prenatal energy left in your body until you are a young adult. And then over time, you start to lose that energy and it leaks out. And then you become, as you get older, you get sick, and then you get stiff and you die, right? So that's following the normal trajectory of life. You go from having this really good pure energy when you're a fetus and when you're a young person, and then gradually it goes away and eventually kaput, fini. So that's what complying means, death, or going with the flow means death. But reversing means life, or reversing, actually they say reversing means you can become an immortal, which is a whole other topic that I talked about in another video. um, but basically, reversing the course means, rather than doing all the normal things you do that cause you to leak energy, like, looking at attractive people with your eyes, and listening to, beautiful music with your ears, and eating the most delicious food with your mouth, and yapping, and doing other things that cause you to lose your energy. Instead, when you meditate, you return your energy inside, and you don't use the eyes to look outside, and you don't use the ears to listen outside, and you don't use your mouth to yap, 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 and you don't use your tongue to taste food, and you don't follow the thoughts from your mind, and you don't follow the sensation from your body, but instead you reverse everything inward and listen internally to stillness, and observe internally the movement of the breath, and make yourself very calm until you enter a very deep state of meditation. And then from that point, it's possible to even forget that you exist. And after you do that, that's considered to have reversed the course for a certain period of time, so that you go back to the state of primordial unity, which is where the fetus gestates in the mother. So you've probably heard that Taoist has this idea of recreating pregnancy inside of our own bodies. That's what it means, is that by going against the tendency to use your senses to engage with the outside world, ergo losing energy, you return your awareness inside and return to stillness very, very deeply, usually focusing on the lower dantian. And then it's possible to turn the process around and get some of the energy of your birth back, some of the energy of your heavenly inheritance back. So when Taoists use the term shun and ni, especially in internal alchemy, they usually mean that if you go with the regular flow of life, basically you're just along for the ride, and you're going to get into trouble eventually, and probably your own actions will lead you to your death, right? Just like it says in the Tao Te Ching. And so if you reverse that course by meditating, and you spend a lot of time in tranquility, and you attain this sort of primordial oneness state, then it's possible to recreate the conditions that your body was created in, and you get back that wonderful vital energy that you had until you were a young adult, right? So when they use shun and ni in Taoism, that's what it means. Now, here's where I think the confusion comes in. In the martial arts, they also use the term shun and ni, right? So ni means to reverse. When you do reverse breathing, you're using ni xi, right? Ni xi means reverse breathing. And so it's not that, if you look at the really smart people who wrote some of these Qigong books in the 1980s and 90s, right? Um, I think the misinterpretation came when they realized that the martial artists used the same exact term ni that the Taoists use, but they omitted, or maybe they didn't know internal alchemy. This is my personal opinion. They probably didn't know internal alchemy practice, so they didn't know the meaning of reversal, and so they assumed into it, because there's this common misconception that internal martial arts are Taoist in nature, and external martial arts are Buddhist in nature, right? It's better to say internal martial arts are influenced by Taoism. That's a more correct way of saying it. And so they seem to have made that mistake. But then another question we should ask is, well, Taoism has a lot of different kinds of breathing practices. Maybe there's another one that uses reverse breathing that I didn't mention. And so I'll say it like this: you should seek to understand the goals of Taoist practice in different generations. It's not just about what people practice today. Taoist practice is 2,500 years old, and it's undergone many transformations over the generations. So in order to understand why they practiced in certain kinds of practices, you have to think about what their goals were and what their level of realization was at that time. And so when you look at the oldest Taoist breathing practices, they're actually mostly based on taking deep inhalations and holding the breath, and then You maintain the breath hold for a certain period of time and then let the breath out slowly through the mouth. So the deep inhalation comes through the nose, it expands the abdomen. Actually, it doesn't retract it. Then the abdomen's held in that expanded state for a certain period of time, and then the breath is let out slowly through the mouth. These early practices were actually done in conjunction with fasting. And so the basic idea was that if you were doing the deep breathing exercises all the time, you wouldn't be hungry. So people thought that you could essentially um, provide your nutritional requirements with air, right? That was the original old idea in the Taoist documents, or those old breathing documents that we call Taoist. And so practices like tuna, right? So mouth exhalation and nose inhalation practices emerged from within that context, and they became more complex over the years. Eventually, tuna practice was split into two major parts. Tu, right, spitting, means that it emphasizes the out breath. For instance, you might make a certain sound when you breathe out, like si or ha, right, in order to deal with qi that's located in certain parts of the body. And we'll have another video to talk about that later. Or you might hold the breath and using a similar method to the one I just mentioned, and you might combine it with saliva swallowing, or clicking the teeth together, gathering the saliva with the tongue, swallowing it, breathing in and holding the breath until the saliva makes it to the stomach, right? And then allowing the breath and the saliva to be together in the dantian. That could be another thing that a lot of people did, as recently as or as early as like 1700 years ago, or maybe a little longer, and as recently as today. But those practices really have nothing to do with reverse breathing at all, and they have nothing to do with compliant breathing either, because they don't use this principle of naturally letting the abdomen expand on the in-breath. Actually, the principle is that the abdomen is intentionally expanded on the in-breath, and they definitely don't withdraw the abdomen. So when we look at the earliest Taoist breathing practices, that's how they are. As we go through history, um, they broadly stay similar, right? There's tons and tons of Taoist breathing practices, but they broadly stay similar. And the reason is because it's never been an interpretation in Taoist energetic practice that you should intentionally use the breath to draw energy up the spine. So here's where I think another misconception happens. Taoist practice is not well known in the Western world. It's really poorly understood in the Western world. Now, listen, I'm not saying that I have impeccable Taoist practice, but I've read hundreds of documents about Taoist practice, and I know the internal alchemy genre very well, and I'm pretty familiar with what could be broadly categorized as the Daoist Qigong genre. And I have never seen mention of reverse breathing in any Taoist document at any time in history. And in those documents which people make an erroneous interpretation of reverse breathing, it's actually not what they mean, and I can prove it, but maybe that's a topic for another video. So I think what's happened, though, is that Taoist practice is not well known, but internal martial arts practice and Shaolin practice is reasonably well known, although there's a lot of misinterpretation there. Qigong practice is fairly well known in the West, although again, there's a lot of misinterpretation there. But yoga practice is probably a little better understood in the West. And so, one of the things you can see is if you look at pictures of yogis, right, there's some schools of thought where people are really like sucking up their abdomen really deeply, and you can see all the ribs and stuff like that, and it's part of certain types of yoga practice, and it's got its own purpose. And yes, I believe it can have some relationship with moving the chi up the spine, or the prana up the spine, right? But remember that, well, maybe you don't know this, or maybe you do, but you remember like 20 years ago, people used to call Dao Yin and Qigong Taoist yoga, right? So there was this idea that Taoism and yoga are somehow related to each other. And not only that, but this guy, Bodhidharma, actually brought Indian methods into China when he went to Shaolin. So maybe that kind of washed over too. And that's how we got the I Ching, the marrow changing classic. Actually, I did another video about Neidan versus Neigong, which you should check out. In that video, I explained clearly what's the background of the I Ching. It's a practice which started to appear in like the 17th century. It's not from Bodhidharma. There's no way. That's a legend. It's only a legend. And so in that context, right, we have to understand the impact of yoga from India or from Tibet on Chinese thinking, especially Taoist thinking, is not that big. And where it is present, it's present in ways that might surprise you, right? So the chakra system sometimes makes it into Neidan texts, or a couple of the different chakra systems sometimes make it into Neidan texts, but it's almost never in this kind of way of very physicalized, sucking up the abdomen and imagining the chi shooting up the spine to the head and this kind of thing. There are practices that are in the Yangsheng school, which may be associated with Taoism to some extent, where there are post heaven rotations of the microcosmic orbit. But those post heaven rotations of the microcosmic orbit tend to be focused more on either visualization or very particular types of adjustment of the intention or the breath or saliva swallowing and these kind of things that are not predicated on reverse breathing. So one of my favorite texts in the genre is called Xiao Yao's Dao Yin Jui. So Master of Carefree Wandering teaches leading and stretching. And in that text, there's a whole bunch of methods of practicing the small heavenly orbit, some of which use the intention, but none of which use reverse breathing. Ditto for Minyi De's Yangsheng Shisan Zuo, another really good Yangsheng text, which can be associated with the Taoist tradition. Um, it has a method of opening the orbit, but it's really not about this kind of like, sucking in the breath and pulling up the, this kind of stuff. Or at least not very much, right? If you were going to do that as a technique, it would be very, very sparing. It's not this kind of continuous reverse breathing, right? That's never present in any Taoist text, as far as I know. So another thing is, I think also that using shunxi, right? Let's say compliant breathing or smooth breathing, and associating it with Buddhism also is a mistake, right? Because of course Buddhism has many different breathing methods. The Chinese Buddhist Tiantai school, which I research a lot, it uses many of the same Taoist techniques that Taoists use, right? It uses tuna techniques. It uses sounding the breath on the exhalation. It uses breath holding. It uses putting the breath in different parts of the body. Um, but it doesn't talk about this kind of like inflating the abdomen on the in breath and relaxing it on the out breath. um, that kind of just happens naturally, right? And so it's important to understand that Taoist and Buddhist techniques are subtle, they're varied, they're contextually dependent on the school that you practice, and they don't necessarily comply with modern Qigong or the martial arts. So this idea of so-called Taoist reverse breathing and Buddhist smooth breathing is only a misconception. It started sometime in the 20th century. And to be honest, in Chinese texts, I've never seen the term Taoist reverse breathing or Buddhist smooth breathing, right, in modern or ancient texts. Because in English, you say Taoist. In Chinese, you can't say Taoist in the same way that you say it in English, okay? So Taoism in Chinese is Dao Jiao or Dao Jia, or some people use other names like Xuan Shui, right? So Dao Jiao, Taoist religion, Dao Jia, Taoist school. Xuan Shui, mystery study, right? These kind of things are used to apply to Taoism. You don't say Dao Jia Hu Xi, right? Taoism breathing. You might say it. You could say like Dao Jia Hu Xi Fang Fa, right? The Taoist breathing method, but it's not something that you give this short little, like you don't say like Taoist breathing or you don't say Buddhist breathing in Chinese texts. That's just not a, I don't know quite how to say this. Like, it's not framed in that way, even in modern texts. And so I'll give you an example. Excellent, one of the best researchers of Taoist internal alchemy arts, Hu Fu Chen. He's written a whole bunch of books about internal alchemy. This one is called Dan Dao Xian Shu Rumen. So, alchemical Dao immortality arts fundamentals. And throughout the entire text, he talks about basically every genre of Taoist internal cultivation practice, not just internal alchemy, but pretty much every genre. And reverse breathing isn't mentioned even once. And so-called Taoist breathing isn't mentioned even once. It's just not a thing. So anyway, I hope that this video has been helpful to you. I hope that I haven't ruffled too many feathers. Um, if you know of some classical mentions of reverse breathing, by all means get them out, and educate me. But if it's from any of the major Taoist texts that I'm familiar with, like Xingming Guizhi or Huiming Jing, where they talk about certain energetic movements that might be misconstrued for reverse breathing, then I'm going to give you a little bit of pushback too. Okay, so anyway, that's all I got. It turned out not to be really a short video. It was actually a full length video, just without the AI and music. um, but anyway, I hope that you like this video. And feel free, of course, to answer in the comment section. And if you like it, please subscribe, and hit the like button. And wish me luck in my seminar in Amersfoort, and wish my son a happy birthday. Thank you very much, and see you next time.